East Africa has an abduction problem. In Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, illegal detention by police, mysterious disappearances, government kidnappings have become the norm. And these countries aren't operating in isolation. An activist might disappear in Kenya, then reappear in a military prison in Uganda. In January, a Tanzanian woman in Nairobi was abducted and set to be handed over to the Tanzanian police before human rights groups stepped in. Last year, Kenya reported over 80 political abductions in 6 months. Tanzania has had 60 reported abductions in the past 2 years, and Uganda registered over 1,000 abductions during the 2021 elections alone. So why do East Africa's police so often practice unlawful detention? And what political networks exist that allow East African politicians to kidnap and deport each other's rivals? British colonialism in East Africa was a messy business. Tanzania, for example, started life as a German colony. Governor von Goetzen was a military man and saw little difference between the police and the army. During the Maji Maji rebellion, when villagers refused to grow cotton, von Goetzen used soldiers to try and enforce colonial law. When the situation descended into open war, he burnt huts and fields, leaving hundreds of thousands dead by famine. From very early on in East Africa, colonial law seemed to be an extension of the arbitrary demands of the most powerful. In a sense, Maji Maji was exceptional. British colonial police usually prioritized keeping the peace. Empires can't afford too many rebellions. As cities like Nairobi and Dar es Salaam grew, so did their law enforcement. Rural areas were mostly left alone. It was in the 1950s that colonial police in East Africa found themselves in the spotlight. As frustration over colonialism grew, the colonial government used police to monitor, arrest, and interrogate political activists. The most famous example of this came in Kenya, where a police team, the Special Effort Force, was created just to deal with the Mau Mau uprising. This eventually included 14,000 police officers who would go on to arrest up to 160,000 Kenyans. Many of these arrests were made on a hunch or weak evidence. Prisoners were interned without trial in concentration camps. Even in Uganda, the quality of policing in the build-up to independence was questionable. British policeman Stuart West would reflect, "Overall, I was very uncomfortable with the case files constructed and felt that a lot of old scores were being settled with false evidence." When lawyer Milton Obote arrived at the prison offering to defend those arrested for protesting, he was refused access. In Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya, post-independence policing shared similar activities. Firstly, there was a sense that beyond procedures and rules, police were obliged to obey those in authority. If the president demanded it, it should be done. Secondly, the police were supported by political militias and village vigilante groups who became responsible for some of their dirty work. Finally, policing became heavily biased in favour of the ruling party, with loyalists recruited and promoted to the highest ranks. In Tanzania, the Field Force Unit was a special police branch created by the colonial government. However, when the country gained independence, the FFU was allowed to continue. In fact, the state started using it to crack down on opponents. Only party members were recruited. It broke up student protests, killed demonstrating workers, and ended strikes. What was legal and illegal didn't matter. Since orders came directly from the highest echelons of government, police simply came to believe this was how their job worked. At a meeting held in 1976 in Dar es Salaam, several police officers testified they knew what was being done was unlawful, but they were still prepared to do it because orders came from the top. As the rise in abductions grew, the governments of East Africa looked for somewhere to keep their illegally arrested prisoners. In Kenya, Daniel Arap Moi's police used the basement of Nyayo House, where inmates were subjected to abuse. By avoiding normal prisons, the government was making a statement. The state was above the law. This feeling that there was a shadowy dark power which could strike anywhere without accountability terrified people. It weakened opposition and gave ruling parties unquestioned power. It was the mystery of the African deep state. Idi Amin's regime in Uganda mastered this fear-mongering strategy. The explosion of disappearances that followed his rise to power were unexplained. In fact, the government repeatedly denied all reports of violence and killings, calling these stories lies, even as they were carrying them out. People were confused, scared, and submissive, unsure of where to turn or what to do. This was the big attraction of an abduction. It didn't just remove a political threat, it left the masses whispering and nervous. Without high-tech crowd control, mysterious abductions seemed an obvious way to decrease the likelihood of protests, and at their disposal, East African elites had a compliant, compromised police force and a collection of loyal militia groups. Abductions became the norm. East Africa's current leaders, Mama Samia, Museveni, and Ruto, all draw on the same playbook of abductions. When Ugandan opposition figure Dr. Kizza Besigye disappeared in Nairobi and then reappeared in a military jail in Uganda, most observers assumed the two governments had done a deal. When protesters flooded the streets of Nairobi during the finance bill protests, Ruto deployed abductions as a strategy to spread fear and limit unrest. Some of those who disappeared, for example Denzel Omondi, never returned alive. Meanwhile, Museveni's son, General Muhoozi, has publicly boasted on X that he is holding disappeared opposition figures in his basement, even sharing humiliating photos of them. And although Tanzania reports the lowest official abduction figures, in reality its leader, Mama Samia, may be the worst offender of all. In Uganda, we are being ruled by a dictator. But when I arrived in Tanzania, Museveni was like Angel Gabriel. We were abducted by thugs whilst inside a police station, remembered opposition activist Agatha Atuhaire. Her and Kenyan Boniface Mwangi were subjected to brutal behaviour by the Tanzanian police. When the next day an MP for the ruling party preached against abductions from the pulpit, he found police had arrived to shut down his church. There are no abductions in Tanzania, or else. In reality, abductions are an expected part of political life in East Africa. They are so ingrained in the national consciousness that hoax abductions are now a thing. The sad truth is there is no need to cry wolf in East Africa. The wolves are already in the fold, carrying off the sheep. Uganda, Tanzania and Kenya all inherited problems with police from the colonial era. These problems festered like a disease as ruling parties used law enforcement to maintain power. Today, abductions exist because of these systemic issues, a problem encompassing police academies, informal networks of power and compromised judicial systems. And each new leader says to themselves, everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't I? Only concerted political pressure can bring an end to this pattern of behaviour. It may be that in Kenya, we are beginning to see the start of just that.